Hello, welcome to Workforce Adjustment, What Members Need to Know. This workshop is designed specifically for workers employed with the Canada Revenue Agency. Before we begin, let us acknowledge our presence on Indigenous land and the peoples who have served as stewards for millennia. I am speaking to you today from Halifax, Nova Scotia, the ancestral and unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq people. Let us reflect on our relationship with the people who have been stewards of this land for millennia. Land acknowledgement is also a commitment to better understand these realities faced by Indigenous peoples and to working together towards reconciliation. My name is Nancy MacLean. I'm a regional representative with the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Workforce adjustment is currently a top priority for staff at all levels of the union. The Public Service Alliance of Canada is working tirelessly to mitigate the harm to our members who have been affected and to support them through the process of workforce adjustment. Once again, thank you for joining us. This session is designed to inform as many members as possible about workforce adjustment. To make it easy for you to access the information, there's a QR code that's found on this slide. If you scan it with your phone, you'll be able to see all the relevant documents, including the Workforce Adjustment Guide and the flow chart. From time to time, we'll use terms in the Workforce Adjustment Appendix. Some of these might be new to you. For detailed definitions, scan the QR code to consult these commonly used terms. The objectives for the workshop is to review workforce adjustment provisions under Appendix C of the collective agreement and to discuss the application in workplace situations. We'll identify key rights and responsibilities of the parties to the workforce adjustment appendix and also identify and share resources and tools available to members affected by workforce adjustment. Our agenda for the workshop is the opening session, which we just concluded. We'll go on to look at key moments in workforce adjustment history. What does the collective agreement say about workforce adjustment under Appendix C? We'll look at the major roles and responsibilities of the parties, review the workforce adjustment flow chart, provide you with some supports and resources for those affected by workforce adjustment, and then close the session. As you know, this isn't the first time that the federal government has cut positions and/or funding for the federal public service. Let's take a few moments to track some key milestones in the history of workforce adjustment in the federal public service. By doing this, we can learn from the past and plan for the future. In 1985, the PSAC negotiates a workforce adjustment agreement with the federal government for the first time. Then, in 1991, there was the national strike. PSAC organized Canada's largest single union national strike in response to the Mulroney's decision to freeze wages for the entire federal public sector. The strike enabled PSAC to negotiate the new Workforce Adjustment Directive for permanent employees. The directive is adopted by the National Joint Council and applied to all public service unions. It is separate from the collective agreement, guarantees reasonable job offers for affected employees. In 1995, the Liberal government freezes public service wages and Treasury Board suspends the Workforce Adjustment Directive. The 1995 budget announced 45,000 job cuts in the public service over the following 3 years. Then, in 1998, the Workforce Adjustment Appendix is negotiated into collective agreements. This, as a result of the negotiations, protections for employees affected by job cuts are enshrined in the collective agreement, and it makes for a more equitable transition for public service workers. In 2012, The Deficit Reduction Action Plan, referenced as the DRAPE, affected 1 out of 7 federal public service workers, government-wide. 26,000 jobs were eliminated. This time, the workforce adjustment was in place, but the cuts were so substantial that the system was overloaded, leaving employees once again in limbo and with no real guarantees. At Canada Revenue Agency, on April 30th, 2012, 3,000 plus positions at the agency received affected letters. As of June 2012, 1,195 UTE members have received an affected letter. In 2016, there were major changes made to the Workforce Adjustment Appendix. These changes were based on the PSAC's experience with DRAPE and are the most significant improvements since the PSAC negotiated the inclusion of the Workforce Adjustment Appendix in the collective agreement in 1998. In 2023, the Liberal government moved forward with the plan to cut $15 billion in public service spending over the next 4 years through the Refocusing Government Spending Initiative. As a result, workforce adjustments are currently underway, leading to job losses and increased uncertainty for federal employees in the core public administration and agencies. And who could forget, in April 2023, the Public Service Alliance of Canada led more than 155,000 federal employees on one of Canada's largest strikes for nearly 2 weeks. The settlement between PSAC and Treasury Board gives workers a 12.6% raise, compounded over 4 years, and an agreement on remote work that would open the door to individual arrangements for members, but it's not enshrined in the collective agreement. In 2025, more cuts are announced. Proposed cuts will be phased in 7.5% for the years 2026 to 2027, up to 2.5% in the second year, and up to 5% in 2028-2029, for a total of 15% over 3 years. These spending reductions are a continuation of the previous government's Refocusing Government Spending Initiative announced in the 2024 November announced in November 2024, but which was halted when Parliament was prorogued. Almost 600 employees at the Canada Revenue Agency have been affected since May of 2025, and the majority without a guaranteed reasonable job offer. So the workforce adjustment provisions that we have today were won through union activism from the 1991 strike to the inclusion in the 1998 and improvements in 2016. The employer has been looking at removing workforce adjustment from collective agreements, which connects directly to government privatization and downsizing in the federal public service. These protections exist because members mobilized, and without continued activism, they could be lost. That is why it is critical that we stay engaged, organized, and ready to defend and strengthen these rights. So where do you find workforce adjustment? So it's the Workforce Adjustment Appendix is part of your collective agreement. For workers employed at the Canada Revenue Agency, it is Appendix C of your collective agreement. The appendix is identical in every collective agreement for core federal public service members, although there are a few different provisions from bargaining unit to bargaining unit. So what is workforce adjustment? Well, there is a definition that's in the appendix. It states that workforce adjustment is a situation that occurs when the commissioner decides that the services of one or more indeterminate employees will no longer be required beyond a specific date because of lack of work, the discontinuation of a function, a relocation in which the employee does not wish to relocate, or an alternative delivery initiative. So according to the definition, there are 4 circumstances that would trigger a workforce adjustment situation: a lack of work, the discontinuation of a function, a relocation in which a unit that employees do not wish to participate. Let me repeat that. A relocation of a work unit in which the employee does not wish to participate, or an alternate delivery initiative, including the service is being transferred to another level of government, public-private partnerships or P3s, or contracting out and privatization of your work. The Workforce Adjustment Appendix is organized around key decision points. It is comprised of general sections that outline the objectives and definitions, followed by 7 parts and 2 annexes. Let's review them. Part 1, roles and responsibilities for the Canada Revenue Agency and employees. Part 2, the process for the Canada Revenue Agency to notify the union. Part 3, the process that the employer must follow when there is a relocation of a work unit. Part 4, employer obligations to provide retraining opportunities for affected, surplus, and laid-off employees. Part 5, salary protection when employees are appointed to lower-level positions as a result of workforce adjustment. Part 6, choices members need to make if they are not provided with a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. And Part 7, special provisions regarding alternate delivery initiatives, or ADI, where work is being devolved or contracted out to an organization outside of CRA. Unique obligations that are in most cases separate from those found in Parts 1 to 6, unless otherwise specified. And then there are 2 annexes. Annex A, which is a statement of pension principles for Part 7, which is the alternate delivery initiative, and Annex B, charting out the number of weeks of transition support measure available for opting employees based on years of service for members who choose option B or C. The next few slides will deal with some of the most frequently asked questions that we receive as staff. So the first question being, where will you find the purpose of the workforce adjustment provisions in the collective agreement? Well, it's found under objectives, and it states the objective is to maximize employment opportunities for indeterminate employees affected by workforce adjustment situations. Question 2, where will you find who the workforce adjustment provisions apply to? It's found under applications in the directive. It says all indeterminate employees represented by the Public Service Alliance of Canada for whom the Canada Revenue Agency is the employer. Again, it's important to note that the application applies to indeterminate employees. The next question is, under workforce adjustment provisions, where do you find out how members are notified of their status? And that's found under roles and responsibilities, which is Part 1, and specifically Section 1.1.5 that states the commissioner shall advise the employee in writing. So it's important to note that you will receive a written notification if you have been affected. The next question is, where will you find the definition of an affected employee? It's found under definitions in the directive. It says an affected employee is an indeterminate employee who has been informed in writing that his or her services may no longer be required due to workforce adjustment. And the next question is, Where will you find the definition of an opting employee? Again, it's found under definitions in the appendix. An indeterminate employee whose services will no longer be required because of workforce adjustment situation, who has not received a guarantee of a reasonable job offer from the commissioner, and who has 120 days to consider the options of Part 6.1 of the appendix, which deals with alternation. And that's where you find the definition of an opting employee. The next question is, where will you find the definition of a surplus employee? Again, as you can imagine, it's found under definitions in the appendix. And it says that a surplus employee is an indeterminate employee who has been formally declared surplus in writing by the commissioner. Now that we've looked at some of the frequently asked questions, let's look at some key provisions of the Workforce Adjustment Appendix. So there are essentially six steps that the employer must take in the workforce adjustment process. In each step of the collective agreement, it outlines entitlements and obligations of the parties. So let's look at the first one, which is the employer provides the union notice of a workforce adjustment. That's the first step. The second step is that the employer provides notice to the affected employees. Step number 3 in the process is that the employer initiates a voluntary departure program as needed. Step number 4, the Canada Revenue Agency's merit-based retention selection process. Step number 5, you're given options. And step number 6 is layoffs and reappointments. So now we're going to look at each step in further detail. The process begins when the employer provides formal notice to the union that a workforce adjustment situation exists. This is critical as it triggers consultation with the union. The goal is transparency, ensuring that the union has an opportunity to represent members early in the process. So when a decision is made that one or more positions are no longer needed, the employer, the commissioner, informs the PSAC at least 2 days ahead. Unions are consulted to assess impacts and solutions. Workforce adjustment committees are formed, and the objective here is to work with the unions to ensure fair and transparent processes. So once the union is notified, the employer must then provide written notice to the employees who may be affected. This step ensures employees are aware of the potential impact on their positions, and it opens the door to begin discussing options. So when a person might lose their job, they will receive a written notice confirming their status as an affected employee. People on leave, such as maternity leave, parental leave, or sick leave, will receive notice at the same time as others, but a final decision won't be made until they return. So how could what could the notice contain? Well, there's an official declaration of the elimination of the job, the reason for the decision that was made, the right for you to file a grievance, dates services will no longer be required, and an official layoff date. The first notice informs the employee that their position could be eliminated. It's important to understand that until the selection process has been complete, the employee is not considered to be surplus. The first notice is therefore often brief and contains few details. In some cases, the employer may initiate a voluntary departure program. This is offered to employees who are not necessarily affected. Is to offer another option before the retention process for selecting employees for retention or layoff. It's also done to reduce the number of people going through the retention process. And when is it done? after the notice of effective status, but before the retention process. And it's obligatory if 5 or more members of the same group are affected without a guaranteed job offer. There are key principles in the voluntary departure program. The number of eliminated positions is determined in advance, and in event of a surplus of volunteers, selection will be based on seniority. It's also done at least 30 days before the notice is given. Again, the objective is to provide a voluntary alternative and to limit layoffs. Really, it's done to find out who would like to go. So let's talk about the merit-based retention selection process. So merit is defined by the ability to perform the duties of a position based on criteria such as experience, qualifications, and performance. For example, if 4 out of 8 positions are being eliminated, the employer will evaluate each employee against these criteria to determine who will be retained. The employer determines and applies the merit criteria. So the Canada Revenue Agency applies its own merit-based staffing policy to manage its workforce. The objective here, again, is to determine who will be retained for the position and who will be laid off. The union has some key concerns with the merit-based retention process. Some of the concerns that we have is that there is a lack of clear and consistent criteria. And that's because the employer is the one who determines and applies the criteria. It's arbitrary decisions that are made. There is some subjectivity based on the employer, and there could be issues of favoritism. There's also a lack of transparency. And some concerns that we have is the risk of employment equity violations and discrimination in retention decisions. So the PSAC demands that the employer establish an objective of having a more transparent criteria, that they comply with the requirements of the Employment Equity Act for equity-seeking groups such as women, Indigenous people, persons with disabilities, and racialized individuals. At this stage, people who are declared affected are presented with options under the Workforce Adjustment Appendix. So options may include opting for a guarantee of a reasonable job offer, opting for retraining, or choosing a retention support measure. This is where employees make decisions, important decisions to them about their career path within or outside of the public service. The opting employee is informed in writing that they are opting and will have 120 days to choose between 3 options. If no choice is made, option A is applied by default. Let's take a look at those 3 options. Option A is the surplus preferred status. This is where the employee will have hiring priority within the Canada Revenue Agency for a period based on years of service. Don't worry, we'll look at that in more detail. Option B is the transition support measure, or the TSM. It's a voluntary departure in exchange for a cash payment based on years of service. And option number C is the education allowance, which could include the transition support measure, option B, plus up to $17,000 to pay for training, with a possibility of unpaid leave for 2 years. So again, now let's look at those options in greater detail. Option A, which is the surplus employee with preferred hiring status. This is what the appendix deals with or states. Seniority-based preferred hiring period. So an opting employee with a guarantee, without a guarantee of a reasonable job offer, will be granted surplus status with hiring priority based on seniority. With less than 10 years, you'll be granted staffing priority of 12 months. program, please visit the PSAC national website on the hub, and there is a link to register to be an alternate. Now let's talk about another key provision called the Early Retirement Incentive. This allows certain employees to access their pension without penalty if they are laid off or choose to leave under workforce adjustment. It was announced by the government in the 2025 budget, and information is still evolving around it, but please continue to check the PSAC national website for current information. As we navigate the details and impact of the Early Retirement Initiative, there is no pressure to decide right away. Take your time to weigh your options and make the decision that is right for you. Here's who is eligible, though. If you want to participate in the ERI, you must be within 5 years of pension eligibility. You must have at least 2 years of pensionable service, have worked at least 10 years in the public service. Surplus employees must be between the age of 55 to 64 without a guarantee of a reasonable job offer. It's broken up into 2 groups. Group 1 is people who are age 55 to 59 and hired before January 1st, 2013. And group number 2 is age 60 to 64, hired after January 1st, 2013. You must be available to people who are, it's also available to people who are laid off or resign during workforce adjustment. You must participate in the voluntary departure program, be an alternating employee or opting employee who has either chosen option A or B. You are ineligible if you received a reasonable job offer and you have refused it, or you've taken the education allowance. Finally, let's look at preferred status entitlement, which ensures certain employees are given first consideration when positions become available during workforce adjustment. This applies to some employees affected by workforce adjustment or certain other circumstances. So you must have layoff preferred status. So again, a person who has been laid off is entitled to preferred status for appointment without staffing recourse to a position in the Canada Revenue Agency that the CRA deems the employee to be qualified for. The preferred status is for a period of 15 months following the layoff or termination date, and is one of the options provided to an opting employee and for whom the commissioner cannot guarantee a reasonable job offer. If you have any questions about merit-based retention selection process, options, alternation, or voluntary incentive departure, I invite you to contact your local executive or component. Let's look at the responsibilities and rights that you may have with regard to redress. So the collective agreement and the workforce adjustment guide for PSAC members at the Canada Revenue Agency outlines responsibilities and obligations for the parties. Primary responsibility for workforce adjustment lies with management. You can access that guide, the Workforce Adjustment Guide for PSAC members at the Canada Revenue Agency, again, by visiting the PSAC national website and going to the hub. Again, the QR code will take you there. But let's look at some of the management obligations. So management is obliged to support employees with skill development. So employees must be skilled as possible or have as much skilled as possible to increase placement prospects and have job security. Management must also review existing work practices and discontinue reliance on contractors, temp agencies, and consultants before considering cuts to indeterminate employees. And they must explore all options to avoid layoffs. So the voluntary departure program and alternative programs should be fully utilized. So if you are aware that the employer is not meeting its obligations, be sure to talk to your local union representative so that they can follow up. The employer responsibilities continue and state that they must advise and consult with the union as soon as possible. Remember, they have to notify the union when they know that there are positions that have been affected. They have to maximize employment opportunities for indeterminate employees. When possible, provide alternative employment opportunities and give employees every reasonable opportunity to continue their career in the public service. Treat employees equitably. Establish joint workforce adjustment committees. And review the use of consultants, contractors, temp agencies, term employees, and all other non-indeterminate employees. And where practicable, avoid re-engaging them to facilitate the appointment of surplus or laid off employees. So employers can't just lay off permanent indeterminate employees, but then go and hire terms to replace them, or go to temp agencies to replace people who have been laid off. That's not correct and must be addressed with the union so that we can address it. Employer responsibilities continue on with them identifying opportunities for retraining to help employees continue their careers in the public service. They have to notify employees in writing about their status and any changes to it. They have to establish voluntary departure programs for all workforce adjustment situations involving 5 or more affected employees working at the same group level and work unit. They must maximize employment opportunities and prioritize internal placement, and assign a counselor to all affected employees who have not been secured in indeterminate employment. Employees also have responsibilities. Employees facing workforce adjustment must take a proactive approach to explore their potential employment opportunities within the agency, and even within the broader federal public service. So once it's clear that a workforce adjustment is inevitable, you should collaborate with human resources to find new roles, gather information about entitlements under the workforce adjustment appendix, provide resumes or other relevant information that can assist the employer in securing new work for you, ensure that you have and can be easily contacted, consider training and job opportunities, and be aware of the timelines and proactively consider your options when decisions are required. Remember, once you've been notified, the clock starts ticking. Unions also have responsibilities. So unions must monitor the employer's actions to ensure that they are complying with the principles and the practices of the Workforce Adjustment Agreement. They have to hold information meetings with all members affected and not affected. They must hold special meetings for affected members, and they must refer members to external organizations for support and guidance where applicable. Unions must also assist, support, and advise members through the STEP process. They must consult with and work with management via the Joint Workforce Adjustment Committees. And those are at the local level and also at the national level. They must problem solve with the members as much as possible and represent members who have grievances. I want to take you through a workforce adjustment scenario now, where we apply all the elements that we've talked about this afternoon. Please go to the hub and make reference to the flow chart because we're going to be utilizing that. So again, I want to walk you through a situation where a worker receives an affected letter. You may want to, again, access the flow chart to help you as we walk through this scenario. So this is a scenario about a member named Oliver. Oliver has received an affected letter. Let me read it to you. So it says, after careful consideration and a thorough exploration of alternatives, we have had to make difficult decisions about our workforce in response to agency financial restraints. As part of the federal government's Refocusing Government Spending Initiative, the Canada Revenue Agency has been required to implement measures to reduce costs to its operations. Following a comprehensive review of program activities and service delivery models, the agency has identified areas where operational adjustments are necessary. As a result of changes to program priorities and a shift in workload demands within the collections and verification branches in the organization, Sudbury is the location, it has been determined that the current level of staffing in certain functions will be reduced. Due to the above workforce adjustment situation, you are declared an affected employee as of August 1st, 2025. In line with the workforce adjustment provisions of your collective agreement, a copy of the WFA Appendix C is attached. Please keep this letter for your records. Then your union has received the information regarding the workforce adjustment situation. That letter to Oliver goes on to tell him about who he can contact, such as Human Resources, his union rep. You can contact the Employee Assistance Program, the Pension Center, and it states that your management is also available to help you through the process, and it provides Oliver with the name of the manager. So Oliver just got a letter telling him that they are affected employee due to a lack of work or continuation of functions. This means their position may no longer be required, but it does not mean that they are out of a job. The employer is telling Oliver that they can change, that there are changes happening to their position, and the position may be affected. So let's go to the first thing in the flow chart is the initial notification of an affected employee. An affected employee is an indeterminate employee who receives a letter saying that their job may no longer be required or is no longer needed. It's an early warning. It is not a layoff. Before an employee can be notified, the commissioner must first inform the national president of the Public Service Alliance of Canada in writing. This notice must include the work unit, the location, the number of employees who may be affected, and expected timelines of changes. Workforce adjustment happens when some jobs are no longer needed due to lack of work, discontinuation, relocation, or transfer of services outside of the agency. The agency's policy is to maximize employment opportunities for affected indeterminate employees by finding alternative positions wherever possible. So now I want to talk to you about a little bit more into the slide. So now we're going into the flow chart. So now we're going to look through the flow chart together using Oliver's letter as an example about what his options may be. So receiving an affected letter can be very difficult and emotional for many people. So please take care of yourself in the way that feels best for you during this discussion, because you too may have also been affected. If Oliver becomes an opting employee, their job is ending and they haven't received a reasonable job offer. So they have 120 days to decide on 3 options under the Workforce Adjustment Appendix. Their choice must be made in writing. So it's not okay just to say to your manager, this is the option that I have. The expectation is that you will respond in writing to your option. Again, let's do a quick review of the options. Remember those options, A, B, or C. A, 12 months surplus preferred status period to find another job. So you put on basically a priority list to find another job. Option B is the lump sum payment called the transition support measure based on years of service. And then option number C is option B plus up to $17,000 for education or retraining. And if Oliver does not choose within the 120 days, please note that option A is applied automatically. So if Oliver does not respond in writing to the employer within the 120 days, the employer will automatically choose option A for Oliver. They are also entitled to up to $1,200 in career or financial counseling to help make the decision. If Oliver is offered a reasonable job offer, then there's no longer eligibility for option A, B, or C because he has a job. So Oliver may be able to participate in the alternation program, which lets certain employees stay in the agency while helping others leave voluntarily. The alternation happens when an opting employee or a surplus employee who chooses option A swaps positions with a non-affected employee who wants to leave and is taken either the transition support payment or an education allowance. This gives the affected employee a chance to remain employed and helps the agency avoid layoffs. The new position must be permanent within the agency. The key takeaway is that the alternation is a win-win solution. The affected employee keeps the job and the departing employee leaves with support. If Oliver decides not to participate in the alternation program, they will still have two options: a 12-month surplus period or the transition support measure, which includes the education allowance. If Oliver opts for the 12-month surplus period, then they will be given a surplus preferred status. Okay? So what happens if Oliver accepts or refuses a reasonable job offer? Well, if Oliver accepts the offer, they move to a new position. They keep their salary. If it's at a lower position, lower pay, they may receive retraining. If Oliver refuses the offer, then he will be laid off after 6 months. They would receive notice and go to the layoff priority list and may receive severance. If no offer comes during the surplus period, Oliver will eventually be laid off, but retains priority status with the agency, and the agency will continue to look for positions for Oliver. The key point is that a guaranteed job offer offers Oliver time, options, and support to stay employed. So there are two outcomes when a person gets surplus preferred status. They cannot accept a reasonable job offer, or they can refuse a reasonable job offer. Again, I want to invite you to download the flow chart that's on the hub. And if you have any questions, please contact your local executive. Every member's situation is unique, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to workforce adjustment. It's important to take time to reflect on your personal situation, goals, and your well-being as you consider the options that are available to you. Each choice, whether it involves remaining in the public service, pursuing retraining, or transitioning to new opportunities, carry difficult implications. Take time to review your options carefully, ask questions, and seek guidance from your union representative. Remember, you don't have to navigate this process alone. There are support and resources available to you, and that will help you make these decisions. And your local union has received an extra training that will help you to navigate all of these processes. And they'll help you to navigate the emotions that you are feeling at this time. As previously stated, workforce adjustment is a top priority for the Public Service Alliance of Canada at all levels. This means that your union is putting a lot of effort and resources into making sure you have the support you need. Whether it's clear information, education, or advocacy, we are here to help you understand the process and to stand with you at every step of the way. The PSAC National website contains the hub. I've mentioned it a number of different times, and it is a wealth of information. I want to show you quickly just what's contained on the hub. So if you go to the national website and you go to specifically by bargaining unit, there is a section specific to the Canada Revenue Agency and workforce adjustment. It talks about and has a copy of the member guide that can be downloaded. All of these resources can be downloaded. So there's the member's guide, and a supply has also been provided to your locals. It talks about the alternation. So there's the area where you can register for the alternation program. There's the affected checklist. So what to do if you receive an affected notice. So we produced an affected checklist for you, things to do. There's a list of frequently asked questions and answers to most common questions around workforce adjustment. And then there's the cut tracker. And this shows how many PSAC members have received notices. There's the workforce adjustment appendix from your collective agreement, a copy of the flow chart that we reviewed earlier, a visual overview of the key steps in the workforce adjustment process, and a glossary of key terms from the appendix, your collective agreement, and other resources. Members who are affected by workforce adjustment may be feeling stressed, frustrated. They may have fear and anxiety, and these are all very common emotions. Members who are not directly affected will also be negatively impacted by seeing the plight of their colleagues, by having to do more with less, and by dealing with work reorganization as well as possible secondary trauma. It's empowering for us to know how workforce adjustment and how it works and how to navigate that process, which can help with these feelings. But it's also important to acknowledge how we feel and how it might be impacting us. Self-care is important. It's important as knowing your rights and obligations. There are a number of resources available to members who may need mental health support, community support, and/or financial support. And those resources are available by reaching out to your local executive. If you have any questions, please contact your local or your component who received, as I mentioned, additional training on workforce adjustment. I want to thank you for being part of this workshop. We hope it provided you with the tools that you need to navigate this current workforce adjustment period. I want to thank you again. Goodbye.